everyone. Welcome back to Astrology Today with Jeff Harman. It's Monday, July 1st, 2024. Cannot believe we're in July already. We have a new moon coming up this Friday, the day after the 4th. So Jeff took a look at it. He's going to go into it, of course, but looks like some good energies might be happening around that new moon. Our topic for today is the higher self, which was inspired by a comment that was left by someone named Frank, who was on our live last Friday. And his comment was, comment/question was, do you think the higher self is the true soul beyond the astrological bottle, in quotes, that we are poured into? So fascinating, wonderful, wonderful topic we're going to go into. And we have a very special guest joining us today. Karlyn. Karlyn is I want to get this right, Karlyn Pleasants. She's a licensed clinical psychologist who's joining us, and her work fits perfectly with today's topic. Really so interesting. And she just came out with her first book, Feathers from the Fire. So we had a wonderful conversation with her. We're going to share that with you. So let's get started with today's show, Jeff.
Oh, right. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about this new moon. This new moon is coming right up here this Friday, which is right after the 4th of July. And by the way, we have the 4th of July coming up, right? The celebration of this great country's Declaration of Independence. And what a powerful time for us to have this 248th celebration of this country, because the new moon happens right after it. And what's so important, this is actually a good new moon because it's happening in a lunar mansion called Puna Varsu, which is from 20 degrees in the sidereal zodiac of Gemini up to 3 degrees 20 minutes. They're 13 degree 20 minute pie slices in the lunar mansion between the Earth and the moon. And this is something that is very interesting. I always joke around and say the astronomers I don't care how much they polish the lenses on their telescopes, they're not going to see the lunar mansions. They're not on a telescope. This is a spiritual construct known as the 27 lunar mansions. The Egyptians and Chaldeans actually used 28, and some of the older Vedic astrologers used 28 as well. So what's important about this is this new moon is really good because this lunar mansion is ruled by Jupiter. What is Jupiter? Jupiter is the expansion, buoyancy, optimism, all that stuff. And what I love about it is these fixed stars of Castor and Pollux in the constellation of Orion are within this. So this has a really good influence. One of the things they say about it is it's called visionary or visionary infinity. So it's a great time to set meditations. And I think we need it right now because I've been speaking on our live podcast. And by the way, I want to thank everybody for joining us on that live podcast. It was a lot of fun and it was a great honor. And this time I'm going to make sure Ella's with us next time. But the wonderful thing about this lunar mansion on this new moons are seed planting times. It's where the sun, which is really the portal of divinity, raining down into creation, and the moon is the crucible where it concretizes spirit, and then it manifests into the 4 elements of the 4 archangels on the earth, which is sunrise, noon, sunset, midnight's representation of the 4 points throughout the day. And so this one's meditation is visible infinity, or visualizations into the infinite, which is very appropriate for our topic tonight. Do we think the higher self, or the true soul, is beyond the astrological bottle that we're poured into? And the answer is yes. This is a really cool show. And again, as you mentioned, we love it when, people give their comments. We can't get to everybody, but we're certainly going to get to what we can. And today, that just really caught my eye. We were looking through the comments on the live last week, which was our first live, and we're going to be doing a lot more of those. And we're going to try and give like a 2 or 3 day notice when we do them. But a lot of fun because this person, again, struck a chord with me. His name was Frank Ebert. And he basically had said, do you think the higher self, or is there a higher self to us that is beyond this lower myopic central, what we call conscious mind, and also the astrological bottle, so to speak? And such a great topic, because I've always been, a little reluctant. They call me the reluctant astrologer. And the reason why is I never wanted to be. I told you I grew up, driving semis and logging trucks and, just, Dukes of Hazzard, northern Wisconsin. And I was never into, quote unquote, astrology the way most astrologers were. It wasn't for my mother, I would have never gotten into it. But she pointed out to me, listen, all the paranormal experiences you've had in your lifetime and astral travels and various different things. She said, astrology is quite possibly the link between the upper soul and, of course, the lower self. And we're also cut off from that. And I spend a lot of podcasts talking about how we are not our astrology. Modern astrology goes through this whole hammering into our heads of, what's your sun sign, baby? Remember, this all came out in the 60s. Hey, baby, what's your sun sign, right? It was the hip thing to do, and it still is. It's pop culture. Everybody and his brothers running around calling each other their sun signs. Nothing could be further from the truth, because what I loved about the ancient Vedic and Nadi astrology, and the traditional astrology as well, is that it proves, in my opinion, we are spiritual beings having a physical experience, but we're dumbed down. We've been knocked out. I think they got a big crowbar up there and boom, they hit us over the head before we're incarnated. And then we end up in these bodies completely knocked out when we're born. And then what do? We move forward, building the current present personality. And I've showed this model. That's why it's really struck me when Frank had sent this in, because I went, wow, you just hit the chord of the thing I really, truly hold the torch for. And the reason I study paranormal spiritual research is because, and psychology, I love psychology. And the guest we have on later, what a wonderful lady. She is a clinical psychologist, as Ella had mentioned, who is really, truly in the trenches helping people. And, it was interesting. Back in the 80s, I got involved with forensics work. I was actually doing voice print analysis and acoustical analysis for legal work in courtrooms. And my very first exposure was a naval officer who was accused of murder. This is like, Tom Hanks, Forrest Gump. He was on his way home to see his mother from Great Lakes Naval Base in the Midwest, right north of Chicago, and took a cab home, got dropped off at his mother's place. And then the cab driver is found late at night, found in a park with a knife stuck in his neck, bled to death, killed him, right? So the prosecutor comes in and says, you killed him, right? Because you were the last one in the cab. And he was going up for life plus 20. And I actually have been in prisons, voice printing prisoners and jails and stuff like that. And this psychologist, she works with really challenged people, and she's such a wonderful lady. And I think this is such a great thing to bring into light. We all have, and Ella, you were mentioning this, how every one of us have a story. Every human being has a story. I don't care who you are. Some of our stories are good. Some of us are very traumatic. Some of us had horrible childhoods. Some of us have had great childhoods. But we all end up through the roller coaster of life being exposed to traumatic events that really indelibly hit our lower personality, the present personality of what we call ourselves. So what is astrology? Because here's what's interesting about what this person brought up. And I love his analogy. He must have got that because I was showing the bottle that surrounds, and I'll put that on the screen, where literally it looks like a bottle. Our aura and our physical body is inside of that so-called bottle where all the celestial influences come upon us. And it's so fascinating. The lady we're going to have on today, her and I have discussed a lot of things about astrology. She's really an amazing lady. And Ella, you and I have as well. And we see these events that happen to people. We can actually see in the Nadi astrology, sometimes when there's, people born deformed. And now enters the word karma. See, and us Westerners always get a little nervous. I know I did, still do, right? When you hear the word karma, you go, well, wait a minute, are we all fated to these energies? In some ways, the answer seems to be yes. But there's one major thing that us human beings are equipped with that no AI will ever be equipped with, and that no other machine will ever be equipped with, and that is the rational lower conscious mind. Something not so common called common sense, right? That we all have. Call it the conscience, call it the upper self, call it the intuition. Many, and Frank was mentioning here, how many remote viewers, and I've worked a lot with remote viewing groups and psychics, where they have to disassociate themselves often from the rational, logical left brain in order to access the portals, if you will, of the ethers in the astral planes. And this is something that is really cool topics. And in the future, I'm going to be designing some new graphs that actually show the multiple dimensions in the astral planes. This is directly analogous to the so-called lower subconscious mind. And I always love to speak about the 5 parts of the soul. And this is not something I came up with. This is something we can find in the Upanishads, which are very ancient sacred texts of ancient India. And of course, out of that, we've seen Taoism, and of course, the Buddhists and all that have branched out of this. The Hunas in Hawaii talk about this as well, the lower self versus high self, and this division that blocks us from it. And I always mention this little mark that we have right here. That's called the mark of silence. They say this mark is what the angel leaves to block us out so that we start with a clean sheet, so to speak, on forming this personality. But is it a clean sheet? It really isn't, because we're influenced by forces that are shown through the astrology through what we call progressions, doshas, time period. I just lost a younger brother, wonderful guy. We adopted him, I think, when he was around 5.5, 6 years old. And Ed was an Indian. And I loved Ed. He was a crazy guy, but I loved him. He was a tough dude. I'll tell you that, man. He was tough. But anyhow, he, throughout his life, had a lot of problems. I had 2 younger brothers. They've had a lot of alcohol and problems with substance abuse. And many people have that. And, he was very traumatized from his young age. And what's interesting is I had warned him that he was going to hit a dosha, which was called a debilitated, and everybody's dosha is different. What that means is a fancy term astrologers use, that when a planet is exalted, it's like Popeye and spinach, really good. When it's debilitated, it's weak. It's in a sign in the zodiac, in the sidereal zodiac, that is really weak. It means it's a karmic challenge for you to overcome. And I remember Ed had hit that back in the 90s. And I warned him. I said, Ed, be careful. I said, you are in a debilitated 7-year Mars major period called a Mahadosha. And oh my God, if I rattle off all the stuff that he got shot in the shoulder with a 44, some drug deal went bad. And I said, Ed, stay out of that world. But the karma drew him into it. He survived. And of course, he just passed away from cancer just recently. But I have to say, I could go on and on and on speaking about clients in situations where we're all influenced by this faded realm, and that's what Frank was talking about, the soul in the bottle. You see, we are all experiencing, and again, I always mention, the earth is a place where time and karma synchronize. In fact, that was the wisdom that many of the ancient rishis, called seers in Vedantic astrology, called birth is the synchronization of time and karma. Think about the profoundness of that. And years ago, 45 years ago or so, I worked a lot with very knowledgeable theologians in the Christian religion, rabbis, you name it. It was really fascinating. And what always struck me was there was a lot of wisdom in all these religions, and there still is, but how much they created lines that you couldn't step out of in their religion. In other words, the systems that were in whatever sect of religion was, we're not open to other things. And this is why our guest today is shedding a light on new practical ways to look at an old problem. And that is our lower conscious mind and coping with the traumatic stuff that we have happened to us. You know, I just had a little boy, a client of mine, wonderful people, and I know the grandmother very well. This poor little boy's mother died of fentanyl. Now here's actually it was his 5th birthday. It was right around his 5th birthday. He's screaming and crying because mommy's dead in the bathroom from fentanyl. Now, do you think that would cause a little trauma on any of us? You bet it would. I mean, and I've seen this in so many children, and it shows up because I often get the blessing of doing the readings for people using the Vedic astrology later in life. You know, they'll be 30, 40, 50, whatever they are. And these traumas are so powerfully embedded into our subconscious mind. And, you know, when you have the death of a parent at a young age, especially like that, where mommy's dead and he found her, you know, so, or was right out and saw the paramedics carrying out and everything else. So, and then of course the father, luckily, and the grandmother got to take custody of him. But in the meantime, Child Protective Services sweeps the child away and puts him in this traumatic environment after mom dies. And then the father was able to get him. I think it was later that day or the next day. I forget the situation, but you can imagine the trauma that any of us would have on something like that. And, you know, Ella, you can remember some of the traumas your sister has gone through. We all have a story of these things, you know, so powerful.
Oh, it's so powerful. And, you know, I was just thinking that these traumas will become generational if we're not careful. Like, we have to be very careful with that. And that's why I loved having this discussion that we had with Karlyn, because what she's doing is she's addressing the problem that a large part of society wants to hide, right? Wants
Yes.
us to keep hidden from ourselves. How are we going to break these patterns? How are we going to break these generational patterns? How are we going to help ourselves unless we are brave enough to truly look at ourselves?
Yep. Yeah, she's going to tell a story about a particular gentleman that was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and
Let her tell that. Yeah.
The authorities were incarcerating him, and she'll tell that story. It's amazing. So, anyways, I think this is such a great topic. And again, you know, you can see in these diagrams where the lower conscious mind, it's almost like, you know, there used to be a game that they used to play in the Middle Ages, and they'd put a gunny sack over your head and they'd beat you with a stick. And then if you got lucky to hit someone else, then you get to take the gunny sack off and they'd put it on and you get to beat him or her, right? So this is kind of like life is. We're all getting beat over the head with something we can't see. And this is the world I'm very blessed to be in, and so are you, Ella, and that is I get to see the astrology, the prints that are going on with the magic of Nadi and Vedic astrology and traditional astrology, and these transits and progressions that are so powerful. And we're about ready to release a product very soon that is really advanced, that will actually use models of very traditional astrology that will allow you to get readings in a very cool program. And we'll talk more about that later. But where am I going with all this? And this relates to the guest today. And that is that we are all living our movie, but our movie has a script that's written quite possibly by past lives, karmas. And it's not just ours, it's the karma that's interwoven with the soul roots to our ancestors, not just genetically either. These could be past life situations where we were married, were in war with, had siblings, or some connectivity to a relationship, or some violence that is now boomeranging and playing itself back out. And this is what's a fascinating topic, is because I have not been bridled, at least not so far, by any state agencies or authorities that come in and say, well, you can't practice this. See, so far, unless the 1984 versions of the state comes in, we are still free to talk about these things. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on this guest, and she's wonderful about what she's been doing. So let's cut to this guest, and then we'll come back and talk about this afterwards. Please. We have a guest that was so kind to come on. I literally called you, Karlyn, what was it? I think 45 minutes ago. And I said, hey, would you be on the show? And you just said, sure, I'll do it. And I thought, wow, that's great. So one of the reasons I want to introduce you is you are a psychologist, right? A licensed psychologist?
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I've been practicing since mid 90s. And really I work with significant mental health, people with significant mental health diagnoses and families struggling with very complex mental health situations. And my love for it has to come from, like, I started working in a program that a woman put together for chronic mental health, but her philosophy was so unique. It was very Lakota Sioux, so very much about community, everyone taking care of one another, low stigma.
I love the Lakota stuff. I've had clients.
Oh, yeah. It's beautiful.
Awesome. For anyone who doesn't know, that's the Lakota Indians. Yeah.
Yes, Lakota Sioux. And working with a population that, in my young mind at the time, very green, was like, oh, these are really sick people. Like, these are chronic people. These are probably people who aren't going to get a lot better. And just had that whole thing, blown the lid right off of that philosophy by seeing people who had been otherwise kind of labeled and categorized this way as kind of intractable, chronic, like getting better. And it wasn't just through community, but it was being believed in. And the founder in particular, which got a lot passed on to me and my cohort, was you always got to look for what's behind the scenes. Like, symptoms are going to come in, reported contexts are going to come in, people are going to come in with their stories about what they think this is all about. And you got to pull it apart, read between the lines, listen for the code, because it will reveal something else. So I've taken that through my entire career, the idea that things are not always what they seem.
Yeah. And there's a story, if you don't mind talking about it on air, that you told me that I was so impressed with. It was about this gentleman who was put in prison and incarcerated by the police, and you were unable to ravel. If you don't mind telling that story, I was so impressed with that. And what a great story, and what a great help you were.
It's great. And he was adorable. He and I used to have a joke. Once he got out of prison and came to my treatment program, I met him in the lobby and I said, I got to tell you, you were a little scary. I'd never interviewed anybody in prison. And he goes, I was scary. You were scary. Not scary. So we were, but so he was in prison. He'd been picked up multiple times for assault, resisting arrest. He kind of looked the part. So I think he drew the attention from authorities, was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, amongst other things, substance abuse. And anyway, I met with him and determined pretty quickly there was a theme in all of the things that led up to altercations and ultimately his arrest, which just had to do with him wanting to go out and get food.
Right.
One was a sandwich, or one was like waiting for a pizza. And this kid had so much trauma and neglect and abuse, lost his parents very early. So scarcity was such a big thing for him, like just being able to eat. Right. So he was really, and not that he didn't play a part in some of the altercations, but it really felt like just a misread, right? Like misreading what this guy was doing at these odd hours, going to get a sandwich. Well, he was really actually going to get a sandwich.
You said the police kind of just unjustly incarcerated him. Thought he was violent.
Yeah. And once they started to question him, and again, he's pretty symptomatic, psychotic, kind of probably came off a little weird or unusual and resisted. So then he got tased and then he fought, and he was a big guy, so you could kind of, where the story went. So I interviewed him, wrote up this big report, gave it to his attorney. They got him out basically in lieu of prison to come to treatment. So he came to my program. And the part of the story that I told you, Jeff, last week was,
this is a good part. Yeah.
He talked in the flowery language of psychosis.
Right.
And it was so common. Everybody, the doctors, everyone would be like, oh, well, that didn't happen. You need to just reassure her then that never happened. And I'm like,
didn't he have like a psychosis of bears attacking him as such? You told me?
So he had this delusion, is what was called.
Right.
that when he was a kid, he would get taken to the circus and they would let the bears out of the cage.
Mm.
And the bears would come and surround him and stick their claws in him.
Mhm.
And he was made to stand there and wait until the bears were ready to take their claws out, and then they would take him home.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, it's not a giant stretch in the imagination to think about what he may have been talking about, right?
Right.
Especially in the environment in which he was raised. But all the people would be like, Karlyn, the bears don't come out in the circuit. I'm like, I know, guys, we know that bears are not released.
And then you unraveled that it was actually based in something in truth in his childhood with the
Absolutely.
molestations.
Yep. With men, molested by men, where he
Wow.
was kind of made to go to this place under the guise of, we're going somewhere fun. So his story about the circus and the bears and learning that if I stood really still and didn't say anything, it would be over sooner.
Mm.
Come on, right?
Wow.
Like,
Yeah.
Wow.
you
So
know
they're
what
calling him crazy. He's
Oh, yeah.
traumatized. He's,
crazy.
violent because of all this, or maybe not violent, but you said he was, exhibiting potential
Sure.
behavior. And you unraveled that it was really a true event that it was happening to him as a child. That's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, like a repeated molest by
Wow.
these older men in his community, which was established later. Like we got enough of the documentation that this actually happened. So my work with a lot of the folks in the program and with his therapist, everybody was like, stop trying to tell him there's no such thing as bears that come out in the circus, that didn't happen to you. Just stop talking about that. Just
Right.
ask it like, wow, bud, that sounds really scary and painful.
Wow.
I mean,
Yeah.
just stop telling him he's crazy. Stop telling him that didn't happen because it absolutely happened. And he came up with a story that enabled him to talk about what happened to him that was
A release.
palatable, if you will,
Yeah.
compared to what really happened.
How else could he heal?
Right. Right. So I'm like, just stop telling him it didn't happen.
I mean, this is wonderful, the work you're doing, because, I always talk about the lower conscious mind. This is why artificial intelligence is never going to be like us. We rationalize things that happen to us so that we can come up with some way to cope and live. And this is exactly what, and you had told me other stories of conditions that you've found that the other psychologists were saying, oh, you're crazy. And then you found out it was actually events that had happened in people's lives.
Yeah. And so it's, learning how to think about even psychosis or very big symptoms as stories. Like somebody is telling you a story. Nobody believes the bears came out. Like it's a story. And if we can listen and find our way to connect, right, it brings out like you said, like healing and the opportunity, the safety.
A way for this energy to come poured out. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We all have it. We all have traumas in our
We all have it.
childhood. We all have things that have happened with our parents or friends. And this stuff can really, most of us deal functionally, but you're dealing in the trenches. That's what I was so impressed about with you, is that you're dealing in the trenches in very difficult, psychological patients, and you're really helping them. Tell us about your book. You have a wonderful book that's just come out. Tell us about that.
It's called Feathers from the Fire. And it's fiction, but not all fiction. And it's essentially a family's story of encountering a really abrupt, like, mental health crisis.
Sure.
And how they move through like stigma and doctors telling them they're crazy and you need to be put on medication. But then also there's a pretty significant Lakota Sioux element in the book. I mean, it's part of my own mentorship.
Sure.
So they have the traditional psychiatrists who are saying meds and blah, blah, blah. And then you have this mentor who's a Lakota man who, in the philosophy, the Native American philosophy, if somebody heard voices or saw things that other people didn't see, they were considered gifted.
Sure.
Mm.
Sure.
The
Sure.
interpretation was the ancestors, this great spirit is speaking through you. I don't hear the things, I don't get to see the things, but you do, so tell me more. And what a juxtaposition to our what kind of Western medicine
Yeah.
Yes.
philosophy, which is you're sick, we need to put you in a treatment center, we need to throw you on some medications to get all that to stop, all that chatter to stop.
Absolutely. Wow, that's great. I
It's
love it. And,
terrific.
thanks so much for coming on. I know you had a very
Sure.
limited amount of time, but, I would really, is there any way people can find out about your work? And I know, aren't you working on another book? You said it's going to come out soon.
I am. The
hear
second one
about
is in
that.
the mix, and it's a prequel to the first book. Where to find it? You could go to my website, which is karlynpleasants.com.
We'll put it up. We'll put it up.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll
And
put
I
it up in the
sent,
links. Yeah.
And I sent Jeff, I sent you earlier the link and a couple of pictures.
Yeah, I'll have the pictures up when I edit this. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is the book, Feathers from the Fire.
Excellent.
And
Yeah.
because there's such a significant element of generational trauma and secrets and stigma, I decided the second book is a prequel. It's dated about 350, 400 years before this one. And
Wow.
it starts, it's a story about like, this thing about like persecuting, labeling, oppressing people who are different or who have gifts that we don't recognize as gifts has been going on forever.
Forever.
It's, it's an earlier story.
Everything that you're saying, first of all, what a blessing you are to those who come in contact with you. Thank you for all the great work that you're doing. And I'm really so moved right now because this just makes me think about my mom, who was so oppressed. My mom was born back in the day, and it's interesting because she wanted to find someone to talk to tell her story to, and it never happened. And then she ended up repeating so many patterns that I know she wished she hadn't done in her life, but she was struggling on the inside. It's like you said at the opening, what we see on the surface isn't what's going on inside. And we all have things happening, strong feelings that we really need to be able to express. Absolutely.
And to be able to do that without fear of being mistreated, labeled, ostracized. Right. Because otherwise, just like you said, then it's this kind of oppressive continuation of the same old thing.
It sure is. And then we get punished or as children or medicated. Sometimes the medication can have its value in really severe situations. But to stay on stuff like that, you were telling me about one patient that was actually damaged. And, even though it may have helped initially, but your therapy had really unraveled a lot of wonderful things. So
and I'm still in treatment. Like I have a treatment center. I, participate in running. I've owned and operated treatment centers. I'm not against treatment. I'm not against meds. It's the format, right, of listening and encouraging people to open up and break the chains in some ways.
Is it your treatment center over in Scottsdale, Arizona?
It is. Yeah. It's called a new treatment center. And it's a community for healing. We opened in Scottsdale. This is our latest version. We opened in Scottsdale about 2.5 years ago. Our other treatment centers were in San Diego, Washington State, and Tennessee.
Wow, that's great. We're going to have you back on.
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah, we're going to have you back on. I got to break something here. Ella and I are coming up with a whole new show. We've been working on it for a long time. And we definitely want to have you back on when we get our regular show launched, which will be soon. And God, thanks so much for coming on. You were such a great guest. I wish we could spend longer, but
I would love to come back. And thank you for the quick call. I mean, I was literally just wandering around the house, and why not?
It worked out. Thank you so much, Karlyn.
Yeah. And again, where can people find more about your work?
I think probably the best direct access would be the website, karlynpleasants.com. The treatment center, a new treatmentcenter.com. A bunch of my stuff is on there as well.
Great.
And then you are familiar with a very dear friend and close colleague of mine, Amanda Johnson.
Yes.
She and I are in partnership with a handful of others at savedbystory.org. house, and that is our publishing house. So
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Love it, love it, and thanks so much. You were so kind. For anybody listening, I dropped this call to her literally 40 minutes ago and said, "Hey, you want to come on the show?" She said yes. I said, "Good, let's do it." So nothing like spontaneity, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. And we'll talk soon.
Okay.
You bet. And
Okay.
wonderful work you're doing. Wonderful work.
Thank you so much.
You bet. So wasn't that a great interview, Ella? I just love
Awesome. First of all, such a wonderful person. And the work that she's doing blows my mind, because years ago, no one was talking about mental health. I can't believe I'm saying these words, but it's true. A few people were, but look how we've progressed in this department, if you will. It's incredible. But the work that she is doing to help these people, what a blessing in their lives she is.
No, and I got to tell you, I always mention to people about the Eastern horizon, where spirit is concretized at first breath, meaning the delivery room where we're born. The earth is a time machine, and it really is. And what's so interesting about her, she was actually born in a degree of how to take complex situations and deduce them into simplicity. And I see this so many times, and I do readings for people all the time where I'm always encouraging these people to follow that guardian star or that angel that's on the Eastern horizon, because it really is all about us following our gut, our intuition, and our soul's purpose. And I'll tell you, that's where astrology can really help guide that. And I mentioned I'm not out here to bash religions, but it's such a shame that this division between studying the mind and studying who we are as, again, spiritual beings having a physical experience can't be looked at in the broadest possible way. Astrology is not the work of the devil. I'm not here defending it by any means, but it is a way of looking at timings in energy. I always talk about the children I've seen where the parents were told to medicate them. And again, sometimes it becomes necessary. But there were times when they opted not to because they saw an astrological energy that I pointed out was in play during these severe times. And when they waited till it ended, it ended. You see? And that's not to in any way say that, psychology, psychiatry isn't a wonderful help. And again, I think her explanations, she was holding the torch, really unraveling a deep psychosis of this. Tony Robbins does stuff like that. He takes phobias, right? And he exposes you to it. And then, that helps people overcome it. I think even this is more healthy because Definitely. It allows, people to really examine these deep-rooted impressions. Dr. Emoto was amazing. He proved to us that thoughts are literally things. And what Daskalos, one of my favorite mystics, is also known as the Magus of Strovolos. I push that book a lot because it's such a wonderful book. I would love to throw that book out of helicopters and have everybody read it before they die, because it opens up our awareness that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. But most importantly, it impresses on the fact that the third eye chakra, where the pineal gland is connected to the vagus nerve, all that, is where it comes out and emits things science can't measure and see. Dr. Emoto proved it. Why? Because what he showed was water, the deep magical substance of water we all couldn't live without, holds these energies, and he would freeze it under a microscope, prove positive thoughts had a positive imprint, and negative thoughts always look like gobbledygook. Fear, violence, worry, discord. He would sample many of those, and I encourage you to read Dr. Emoto's work. It's amazing stuff. But it proves thoughts are literally things. And we are so locked down into our perception of reality and our belief systems that we need to realize we got to sweep that stuff out of the way. It's a lot of it is valuable. We have to live our lives with common sense, etc. But we also have to get over a lot of these inhibitions that we have. I have to tell a quick story. My son is going through a really difficult time. I explained that accident where his ankle was broke. He was attacked in a bar by security. And broke his ankle. He's got 18 screws and plates in his leg, but he's going through a really emotionally hard time. And I was showing him on the computer. I said, Aiden, look you have these progressions going on and they're going to end right here. Be strong. So rather than becoming suicidal, immersing himself into substance abuse or alcohol, he's aware now that, hey, wow, okay, this is really strong and it's right on. And this ends here and that ends there. And this is the direction that looking at your own personal detailed analysis of energies that are coming at it through astrology can really be a benefit. And I also encourage, any way that people can seek counseling and help through psychologists, psychiatrists. I have a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists as clients, and I love it. I really do. I really, truly respect that field because it helps people. And that's one of the main reasons it keeps me doing what I'm doing, is that it helps people get direction and insight. It wipes off the smeary windshield so we can see what's coming at us. You see, it's like, if you remember Jake and the Blues Brothers, remember that wiping off the windshield with the oil on it, so they can see where they're going. And it's kind of like that for all of us. We really need to get perspective because we're emotional beings having a physical experience. We really are. And we've been knocked out in these incarnations. And I believe there's a divine purpose for it. We came here so that I always tell that story how the angels say, God, why do you like these humans? They're crazy. They kill each other. They start wars. They're evil. And God says, yeah, but they come back. They come back. They come back with experience, and we see what good and evil really is like, even though it's all traumatic and it's hard. But we leave this incarnation or the multiple ones it takes to get conscious, and we end up a higher being because of it. And that's however we can achieve that awareness is very, very cathartic.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to go back to the angel on the ascendant for a second, because you spoke about the angel on Karlyn's ascendant and how her knowing that, and for all of us, knowing the angel on the ascendant, what that angel stands for and how that angel is here to help guide us is so important. And I'm thinking about, because you're about to start working on a piece for me, because you do put the angel that's on the ascendant or our guardian angel on pendants. And I'm really looking forward to wearing this piece, because if only as a reminder, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's only as a reminder, but it's so important. I feel it's so important to know this angel on the ascendant, what the angel stands for and how it can help guide us through this life.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. Actually, the angel that I put on the pendant is actually much deeper. The angel that I was speaking, and I speak mostly about in readings, is the angel that's the single degree on the eastern horizon. Actually, one of the live participants had brought up that degree type astrology. And this is where every single degree of the zodiac has angelic forces within it. And so is Exodus in the Bible. Each quintessence of the zodiac around us is ruled by the 72 angels, which is very, very sacred. It's almost like a matrix of human experience. We are avatars in these bottles called physical bodies, and very, very powerful stuff. And what you're speaking about on the pendants, that is a much deeper calculation. That's taking all of the inner 7 planets. In fact, you'll see, I'll put this up here. You can see there's 7 letters followed by the suffix Aleph Lamed. Now, for anybody who's not familiar with Hebrew and Aramaic, that little A and that little L is literally the word L, like Raphael, Gabriel, Oriel. See, the suffix L means of God. It means of divinity. And, I shouldn't bring this up, but you can actually get the evil tempter of the soul too. It's done a different way. This is very ancient stuff where you have to order the degrees from the ascendant, which again, the eastern horizon is called the ascendant or lagna in Vedic astrology, which is where spirit is concretized. That's exactly where we were born, in the delivery room. And that runs around the entire chart in repeated base 22, the 22 Aramaic and Hebrew letters. And you take wherever your inner 7 planets falls, and then I weight those on what we call zodiacal dignity. Now, if your eyeballs are crossing, mine were too when I first heard all this, but you have to unravel the order of powers that each of the planets are in, and that decides which letter goes first, second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth, or seventh. You see, and then you add the suffix Aleph Lamed. And this is known as numerology or gematria. And gematria, the Torah, which is the ancient Hebraic version of the scrolls given to Moses, actually has all these codexes, and so does the Psalms. The Psalms, which are in the middle of any Bible. There's all kinds of angels and codexes that allow us to look at the verses. So what you end up with here is not only do I make the pendant, but I literally have a sheet that tells you the numerology, the transliteration, which is just how you pronounce it, and then also the verses in the Bible. I have seen people's angels say, oh, you were a textile maker before, or you come from this soul root, or you are of the lineage of Job or someone else in the Bible. Really deep stuff. So this is proof that we have reincarnation.
About children who basically are accessing a past life.
Wow.
And they talk to their parent. It's like a thing. I mean, it's like a thing, but of course it gets so quickly shut down. There's not that many people that want to really hear it. But this, like, they were chronicling this very young girl who was like using words and speaking in accents, and her parents were like, we don't know what this is, but really, and then she named her, and it was like a past life.
Wow.
And the idea that people have these different abilities, these sixth sense, these abilities. I mean, working with people with psychosis, they are so incredibly sensitive. They have like antenna. They can feel the wind blow, right?
Wow.
But like, can we encourage that rather than medicate, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The books you and I were discussing when we had talked was Dr. Carl Wicklund and Dr. Edith Fiore, Freeing the Captive.
I ordered them.
Unquiet Death. There is documented proof. One of the books that I just got, it's by Dr. Hyslop. It was written in 1918, and it's Life After Death, and all this heady stuff about these psychologists and psychiatrists who were proving beyond a reasonable doubt. Not only did these people remember things from past life, they were actually able to go and verify the addresses, the names, and the whole lifestyles that were explained by these people who were being channeled on the other side, as we would call dead or disincarnate souls or ghosts, right? So it's so wonderful, the work you're doing. We got to definitely have you back on.
Oh, I would love to. It'd be.
And you also heard Karlyn talk about this, where literally she had said children have been recognized to remember things in their past lives. Dr. Carl Wicklund and many of these other books I put up, Freeing the Captives, etc., literally these children he has verified this. In fact, I have heard of this myself directly, where children would say, oh, I was a lady living in this house. And they'd go to the address and say, was a lady living here by this name? Yeah. When did she die? Well, she died last year or 3 years ago or 5 years ago or whenever it was. How could this child know this? I've heard stories where parents have been told to drive somewhere in a town and said, I used to live there. I've talked to many psychiatrists who, I have one psychiatrist, he is the head of a state. He's the top guy. You don't go any higher than him. He runs the psychiatric board of this particular state. And he's told me, he said, Jeff, he said, I have to stay in the lines. He said, if I get outside of the lines, I'll pull my license. But he said, I love this stuff. And he says, it's absolutely true. He's been in prisons, been involved with, all the hierarchical issues in states that require, someone to be incarcerated, etc. And he says they're possessed. There's no question about it. They wouldn't have this behavior. There's no models in psychology or psychiatry that would warrant this, So this is deep stuff. We could go on forever about this. And this is a topic I truly, truly want to get into. in the future with many other very credible guests, just like the one we had today.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And we are planning on doing that. I mean, for me, I just want us to help each other however we can in this life. Let's help each other.
That's what it's all about, without dogma, without judgment, and that's what's so important is opening up to understanding we're all spiritual beings having a physical experience. And this bottle we're in, to use, our person who precipitated this show, Frank, is really just that. We are avatars in these physical bodies, and they're very important. Common sense dictates we all have our lives. We have to take responsibility, take care of our bills and our health and other people and etc. But it's really interesting that most of the trauma we experience is psychological. It's our emotions. That's because we take our logical, deductive reasoning and we emotionalize everything. Mind control works by traumatizing a individual and then triggering them. This is the same way they train animals. They train in the military. It's the same. What do you think basic training is? It's breaking down your reality structure and reorganizing it so that that person will respond to orders. There's a lot of value to that in various different situations. You can't have everybody just being, the Lone Ranger here doing what they want. But on the other hand, it's very important to understand we are outside of this lower conscious mind, and we are.
You bet. We sure are. Wow, great show. Again, I loved having Karlyn visit with us. Awesome woman. You're going to put her book up, right? And she did say this. She's working on a prequel, which I can't wait to read both of these books. But this has been awesome, hasn't it, Jeff?
Sure has. You bet.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Please leave your comments below. We love hearing from you. Please make sure to do that. Have a beautiful week ahead, a safe 4th of July, and we'll see you next Monday on Astrology Today with Jeff Harman.